Chapter 1. Shinyuechi. What? You can't even call me brother now that you've woken up? The man in front of her was dressed in a crescent moon robe. His handsome face was elegant and refined. Seeing her staring at him, Shinyuechi couldn't help but rub her head. When did my sister become so useless? If someone pushed you into the water, wouldn't you climb out of the water and drag her down with you? Look at you. You're so weak. Yet you're still the daughter of the general's residence. When someone bullies you, I, your brother, have to personally stand up for you. Guyuechin pushed his hand away. Her throat was dry. She stared at the man in front of her for a long time. Didn't she drown in the southern suburbs lake? The scene in front of her was clearly the general's residence. The handsome man in front of her was General Shunhe's eldest son, Shinyuechi. Hey, Shinyuechi, what do you mean? In order to avenge you, I threw the minister's eldest daughter into the water and soaked her for the time it took for 3 incense sticks to burn, almost drowning her. The people of the minister's residence stayed here for 3 days before leaving. It's fine if you don't thank me, but when you wake up, you give me that look. Shinyuechi? Her throat was dry again. The former empress was sentenced to death by the emperor. Why did you follow her? Seeing her pale face, Shinyuechi realized that his tone was too harsh. He sat on the bed and hugged her thin shoulders. At that time, you were accidentally pushed into the water and didn't see the spectacular scene. The late empress's face was covered with 9 thick nails. Her face was beyond recognition. I heard that the 3-month-old child in her belly was ordered to die by the new emperor. It was paraded in the streets and finally, its body sank into the South Lake. Speaking of this, he shook his head and sighed. The Gu family is a group of old people who only know how to fight among themselves. After assisting the new emperor to ascend to the throne, the new empress was sentenced to death by the new emperor on the charge of adultery 3 days after taking office. And the person who had an affair with the former empress was the regent. In the entire Feng country, everyone knows that Imo Wushang is the only one who doesn't get close to women. Once a woman approaches him, the coldness he emits is enough to freeze people. She didn't commit adultery. Guyuechin's voice was hoarse, filled with bitterness and resentment. Of course I know. Shinyuechi rolled her eyes at her. Do you think your brother is stupid? The emperor is a handsome young man with unparalleled handsomeness. He is a rare beauty in this world. When the women in this world see him, who wouldn't want to throw themselves at him? Even the prince regent. It was said that the eldest daughter of the Gu family was infatuated with the new emperor and had been with him for many years. How could she have committed adultery with him? Her good days were about to come to an end when the new emperor ascended the throne. Her good days have just begun. No matter how stupid a woman is, she wouldn't be able to act like this. Hey, what are you doing? You just woke up and your body is still weak. Don't get off the bed. Shinyuechi's eyes widened when she saw her lifting the quilt and walking out of the bed barefooted. She quickly bent down to pick up the shoes for her and ran after her. Grandaunt, don't move around. If you get sick again, father and mother will definitely kill me. Put on the shoes quickly. Hey, stop taking photos. You're so beautiful. Your face is so beautiful. Even when you're sick, you look like a fairy who has descended to the world. She stared at the small face in the bronze mirror. It was unfamiliar yet familiar. It was the eldest daughter of the general's mansion, Shinyuechi. This face did not belong to her. She was dead. Guyuechin reached out and caressed the pale and delicate face. Her face was pierced with 9 thick nails by her biological sister. The 3-month-old child in her stomach was taken out by her beloved husband. She was accused of adultery and was paraded through the streets in a cage in front of the people of the capital. Chapter 2. She thought of that handsome and noble man who was like a god. She clenched her fists under her long sleeves. Her pale lips almost bled from biting. She and Imo Wushang were innocent. She didn't know why Imo Wushang didn't explain that day, but she, Guyuechin, could swear to God that nothing had happened between them. Shinyuechi was shocked when he saw this. He quickly opened her mouth and put his fist in. Be good, be good. Bite me. My skin is thick. Don't bite yourself with your soft and tender skin. Brother. Hey, brother is here. Brother is here. Don't cry. If you cry, Dad and Mom will think that I bullied you again. She also had a brother, and she also had her own parents. But ever since she was young, she had never been pampered. She had never been able to understand. She was also their daughter, the child they had given birth to after 10 months of pregnancy. Was it because she wasn't as eloquent or beautiful as Gu Yuan? From childhood to adulthood, all the good things belonged to Gu Yuan. Beautiful clothes, delicious food, even the leftovers, they would throw them away and not give them to her. When she was 15 years old, her father married her to Feng Juqing, the third prince of the Feng family. After marriage, the man treated her gently and infatuated with her. There were no other concubines in the mansion. This was the first time in 16 years that she had tasted the feeling of being loved. She thought that she would live a happy life with Feng Juqing. But when the late emperor suddenly died, the whereabouts of several princes were unknown, and only Feng Juqing was in the capital. Without a leader, he was supported by the ministers in the court to ascend the throne. She was his empress, for only 3 days. As Gu Yuan entered the palace, she realized that she was just a pawn to pave the way for her. Because at that time, Feng Juqing's power in the court was not stable. No one knew who would become the emperor in the future. Her father and her mother could not bear Gu Yuan to take risks, so they pushed her out. "Sister, what's with your expression? Why do I look a little scary? You're not going to eat me, are you?" The man's words brought Gu Yueqin back to her senses. Now she was Shun Yueji, not Gu Yueqin. Gu Yueqin was dead. She was reborn. He was reborn into the body of Shun Yueji, the daughter of the general's mansion. "I want to enter the palace." Shin Yueji couldn't react to her sudden words. Shin Yueji looked at him and said slowly, "I said, I want to go to the palace." "What the hell?" Shin Yueji's handsome face was surprisingly calm. He touched her forehead and said, Tell me, is there water in your brain? Do you want me to help you control it?" Shin Yueji slapped his big hand down. "The new emperor has ascended the throne, and the power in the court is unstable. Aren't they recruiting concubines to fill the harem? In order to get a better position in the imperial court, all the ministers in the imperial court fought to send their daughters to the palace. I have also reached the age of marriageable age." Shun Yueqi's handsome brows furrowed. "Father is already a first-rank general in the Feng nation and has 500,000 soldiers under his command. In the entire Feng nation, only the Gu family can compete with our Shin family. That's why I have to enter the palace. Doesn't the Gu family have an empress?" "No." Shun Yueqi's brows furrowed even deeper. "Even if the Gu family has a sky immortal, they are not qualified to be compared to you." "I don't want to talk to you. I'm going to talk to father." Shun Yueji turned around and walked out. Shun Yueji pulled her back fiercely. "I'm telling you, it's useless even if you talk to father. You are the pearl of the Shun family. If I send you to the palace, it's a dangerous place. Do you want to compete with a bunch of women for a man?" Fine. I'm afraid of you. Don't you like the regent? I'll give you some ideas. If he ignores you again, I'll kidnap him and let you two make love. Let's see if he dares to reject you again." Chapter 3. Main Hall. Have you thought it through? Entering the palace is not a joke. The one who spoke was the famous general of Feng country, Shan He. This was the first time Shin Yueji faced him like this. When he spoke, there was a sense of authority. Perhaps because he was on the battlefield all year round. The sharp and bloody aura on his body made her feel inexplicably conflicted. "Yes, you are the only daughter in our Shin family. The palace is a dangerous place, not a place where you and your eldest brother can play. Why are you going to the palace all of a sudden?" Shin Xiu also had a worried expression. He stepped forward and held Shan Yueji's hand. The imperial harem is a huge dye vat that eats people without spitting out their bones. The youngest daughter of the Gu family is doing well in the imperial harem. In the entire imperial harem, who is more favored than her? Mother has already asked around for you. The concubines that are sent into the palace have some power, but they are only concubines by the emperor. I have never seen the emperor stay in any of the concubines' chambers. Mother only has you. Since you were young, I have always doted on you. If you enter the palace and suffer grievances, it will not be the same as at home. Your father and brother will both protect you. Father, the Shen family and the Gu family have always been incompatible, no matter in the capital or in the court. Now that the Gu family is in power, you dote on your daughter and can't bear to let your daughter enter the troublesome imperial harem. I know that you have been bullied by the Gu family in the court, but you have always done everything for Feng country and never complained. But how can your loyalty compare to the pillow talk of the Gu family's youngest daughter to the emperor in the future? As the saying goes, one's achievements overshadow the master. Father has the military power and occupies half of Feng country. The Gu family has always wanted to get rid of you, and the Shen family. If you don't resist and rely on your loyalty, you will harm the entire Shen family sooner or later. Jeer. He didn't think that his daughter, who had always been willful and mischievous, could say such righteous words. Shen he looked at her for a long time. Have you really thought it through? From Shen Yueji's words, he already knew that in the court, just relying on loyalty was not enough to gain a foothold. The Gu family had sons in the court and daughters in the future. He and Gu Wei had been enemies for many years. If this went on, he knew that sooner or later, his Shen family's power would be completely destroyed by the Gu family. I think I understand. I am willing to enter the palace. The Shen family has raised me for so many years, and I am willing to contribute to the Shen family. I disagree. Shen Yueji stood up angrily and pulled Shen Yueji behind her. Father, why are you forcing Ji-er again? Ji-er doesn't want to enter the palace. If you do this again, I'll elope with her tonight. Hearing this, Shan He's face darkened, and he glared at him angrily. I told you to study more. Every time she opened her mouth, she would make a fool of herself. Get out of here. I only have one sister, Ji-er. If she enters the palace and suffers any grievances in the palace in the future, who will stand up for her? Even if my Shen family's daughter enters the palace, who else but the Gu family can bully her? Shen Yueji thought about it seriously and felt that it made sense. Mother, say something about father. Anyway, regardless of whether what he said is right or not, I only have one sister. If he wants to send her into the palace, no way. The emperor, that bastard. So what if he is the emperor? He doesn't even deserve to carry my sister's shoes. Chapter 4. Fengqi Palace, Your Highness. You said that you have been in the palace for more than half a month. Other than the time when you entered the palace, the emperor gave you the title of concubine. In this half a month, you haven't even seen the emperor once. Double Happiness leaned on the tea table and sighed. The rumors are true. The new emperor and the empress are deeply in love. He only loves the empress. After ascending the throne for more than a month, he stays in the new empress bedroom every night. The entire harem is filled with concubines, but I haven't seen the emperor step into their bedroom. Sitting in front of the bronze mirror, Shen Yueji applied her powder seriously, as if she didn't hear Double Happiness's complaints. Big brother hasn't forgiven me yet? Since she insisted on entering the palace half a month ago, Shen Yueji locked himself in the room and refused to see her. Before leaving, she knocked on his door to express her determination to enter the palace. The people inside were also stubborn. They didn't open the door to see her even when she entered the palace. The servants of the general's mansion said that the eldest young master seemed to have fainted from hunger. Shen Yueji, Shuangshi shook his head and sighed. He continued to mutter to himself, eldest young master is really a troublemaker. He didn't eat or drink for 7 days and fainted from hunger. When the general and madam heard the news, they were extremely worried. They ordered people to force eldest young master's mouth open and fed him several bowls of hot porridge. Eldest young master's mouth was scalded and blistered. After the eldest young master woke up, he continued to lock himself in the room. Today, the servants of the general's mansion came again and said that the eldest young master had fainted from hunger again. Shen Yueji, Your Highness, you don't have to worry about the eldest young master. Madam specifically said in the letter that the eldest young master will be taken care of by them. He will be fine after a few days. As for you, Your Highness, you have been so lukewarm. The general almost couldn't help but ask the emperor for a decree to bring you back to the mansion. At your age, staying in the harem for one more day is a waste. Shen Yueji's hand paused and looked at her. You are so impatient after entering the palace for less than half a month. What is the difference between you and those concubines in the harem who use all kinds of means to win the emperor's favor? But aren't you anxious at all, your highness? These days, this servant has been observing the movements of the other imperial concubines in the harem. Today, she ate a bowl of lotus seed porridge. Tomorrow, she met the concubine in the imperial garden. In the middle of the night, she stood by the lake singing to attract His Majesty's attention. These endless methods. I'm tired of playing with them every day. Hearing this, Shin Yueji's lips curled. So, no matter how hard they tried, did His Majesty even look at them? Shuangshi shook his head cooperatively. No. For example, that night when the emperor passed by the lake and sang, the people in the palace said that the emperor was almost scared by her. That newly promoted little noble was directly thrown into the water and drowned by His Majesty's order. Feng Juqing had high standards and only cared about power and status. Now Shin Yueji knew that it wasn't that he was deeply in love with her, but that women were trouble for him. Prince. And thought. Young, an emperor, young, and a young. He. Your lady. He, emperor, and he young. He. Master. Year. He. Your highness, where are you going? To look for the emperor? Chapter 5. I'm not wrong. The late empress is not wrong either. Why should I shut up? Guyuan, you're scared. Are you scared now? The 9 thick nails you put on her highness' face, and the 3-month-old baby in her belly, Guyuan. Her highness is your sister. She loves and protects you so much. How could you do this to her? You're biting the hand that feeds you. You won't have a good ending. Never. This lowly servant. Who allowed you to let her in? You're full of nonsense. Hurry up and take her away. Auspicious Harmony Palace. Shin Yueji narrowed her eyes as she listened to the argument coming from inside. The servant's voice was somewhat familiar. This servant girl is so bold. How dare she mention the late empress in front of the empress? Shin Yueji didn't speak, but glanced at her. Seeing this, Shuangshi took a step forward and coughed heavily. The imperial concubine has arrived. Qinghe's face was bruised and covered in blood blisters. Her fingers were so white that her bones could be seen hanging weakly on one side. Her clothes were stained with blood, and the large, auspicious Harmony Palace was filled with the pungent smell of blood. Shin Yueji raised her head and looked at the elegant young girl in a red robe sitting on the high seat. Her beautiful and dignified appearance didn't match her young age, and the excessive and complicated decorations on her head gave people a feeling of pity. Sister, you've treated Ener well, and Ener will remember it all. No matter who betrays you, Ener will never betray you. Guyuan, I just said a few words to trick you, but I didn't expect you to really believe it. Even a dog wouldn't be as stupid as you. Do you know how ridiculous you look now? Every time she put a nail on her face, she would proudly swear in front of her that she used to be proud of things. The scene from her previous life replayed in front of her eyes over and over again. Looking at the elegant young girl on the high seat, Shin Yueji suddenly smiled. A dark light flashed across his pitch-black eyes. Chapter 6. I have been in the palace for some time. The Empress has been claiming that she is not feeling well, so she has waived the ceremony of paying respects to the Empress these days. I am here to pay respects to the Empress today. You are the daughter of the Shen family. The woman in front of her wore a gorgeous yellow dress. Guyuan looked at her. The shallow sunlight fell on the girl, and her beautiful and quiet face was reflected with a kind of enchanting beauty. Her long eyelashes fluttered, and a pair of clear and bright eyes opened, like the sun after the spring rain, gentle and peaceful. Her snow-white skin was tender and delicate, more tender and delicate than a newborn baby. She had a beautiful appearance like a hibiscus, delicate and long eyebrows. Her lips were slightly red, and the tip of her nose was like a drop of crystal-clear pearl on a lotus leaf, refined and elegant. She suppressed the slight displeasure in her heart and revealed a smile. You really deserve to be the daughter of the Shen family. Even I am envious of such a superior appearance. Hearing this, Shin Yueji chuckled. Compared with the Empress sister, my beauty is far worse. Otherwise, since the new emperor ascended the throne, how could he stay in the empress's bedroom every night? Gu Yuan's beautiful face was flushed. She pretended to be dignified and covered her lips to cough. Sister Guifei, what are you talking about? It is because the new emperor ascended the throne that there are a lot of trivial things to deal with in the court. It is understandable that he does not enter the bedroom of the other sisters. I also often advise the emperor not to ignore the other sisters in the harem. I believe that it will not be long before you get the favor of the emperor with your beauty. Favor? Shen Yueji suppressed the coldness in her eyes. She smiled without answering. Mammy Li, old servant is here. Show the seat to Guifei. Guifei, please. Under the gesture of Mammy Li, Shen Yueji slightly bowed and sat on the round chair with the help of double happiness. Just now, I heard this servant girl's hysterical cries from outside. Empress, what's going on? Replying to Imperial Consort Shun, this servant girl's name is Qing He. She was the trusted servant girl of the late empress. The late empress had an illicit affair with someone and was sentenced to death by the emperor. The empress was kind. Seeing that this lowly servant and the previous empress were master and servant, she spared the lowly servant's life and allowed her to continue guarding the previous empress' palace. Who would have thought that this lowly servant didn't know what was good for her and spouted nonsense? They feel that the late empress died unjustly and come to Nyang place every day to make a fuss. Spinning the teacup in her hand, Shen Yueji took a sip of tea. Her expression was indifferent, but her pitch-black eyes were filled with endless mockery. Very quickly, as a sip of tea entered her stomach, she calmed down. She lightly put down the teacup and turned to praise. The harem says that the empress has always been benevolent. She treats the sisters in the palace, from the concubines to the maids and eunuchs, and never harshly criticizes them. Seeing her today, she truly lived up to her reputation. The empress was indeed worthy of the position of the lord of the 6 palaces, even more so than the late emperor. At this point, Shun Yueji paused. When Gu Yuan heard her mention the empress, her delicate face loosened for a moment. Both of them are even more so. You flatter me, Imperial Consort Shun. Kind. Gu Yuan's red lips opened slightly, and her soft voice revealed a trace of sadness. However, just as her words were about to leave her mouth, she was suddenly interrupted by Qing He. Chapter 7. Qing He looked at her with a gaze full of mockery. He pointed at her with his bloody hand, which was full of bones. You poisoned your own sister, killed the child in Mrs. Womb, ruined her appearance, and ruined her reputation. Do you dare to say that you are kind? How dare you? Damn bitch. How dare you slander the empress? I think you don't want to live. Guards, drag this madwoman out and beat her to death. Beat her to death. Mammy Li's face was livid. Gu Yuan's face was also slightly pale. Gu Yuan, you are the favored daughter of God, the pearl in everyone's palm. You have everything. Why do you fight with Miss? Qing He's head was pressed down by 2 eunuchs. He couldn't move, but he still yelled at her hysterically. You are always like this. Do you know how distressing you are? Do you know how helpless you are? But in my eyes, there is no one more disgusting than you in this world. Gu Yuan, what qualifications do you have to kill me? You are such a dirty and vicious person. Do you deserve it? Qing He, sensing her emotional fluctuations, Shun Yueji's eyes darkened, and she suddenly stood up. Bang! There was a loud noise. Qing He struggled to break free from the 2 eunuchs' restraint and hit the stone pillar behind him. Blood splashed and her sight was instantly dyed red. Miss, I come to accompany you. You will never be alone. You still have me. Shen Yueji's sharp nails pierced into her palm. She looked at Qing He's lonely and helpless body lying in a pool of blood. Her clothes were dyed red by the blood. She fell in a pool of blood and no longer made a sound. Her vision was blurred. Through the blood-dyed body, she seemed to see the scene where she was bullied in the Prime Minister's mansion. For a long time, it was Qing He who protected her with her small body. He took the beatings for her and stole things for her. In her ears, it was she who softly called her miss, and her voice was very sweet. She and Gu Yuan were born from the same mother. But so what? Recalling the memory of her mother, she was usually unwilling to even give her a cold glance. She could sew clothes for Gu Yuan herself. The weather was cold, and there were all sorts of things in her room to keep her warm. As for Gu Yuan, her body was purple from the cold. She was shivering and her hands were covered in sores. She cried and went to find her mother, saying that she only wanted one more piece of clothing. She asked the servants in the Fu to make one for her, even if it was a servant's clothing. But, at that time, Murong Yun ruthlessly kicked her in the heart. She was buried deep in the snow. She didn't even give her a cold look, much less a word. In her eyes, she was so disgusting, so unbearable. A kind of hatred spread from the bottom of his heart. That kind of unwillingness, struggling on the edge of death. A sharpness appeared in Shan Yueji's eyes as she gazed in the direction of Qing He. The sharp blade directly pierced through his palm, and a bloody smell filled his palm. Gu, Yu, In, Feng, Jiu, Qing. The harm and betrayal you have brought me, I will repay it tenfold, 100-fold. I will make you pay. Gu Wei, Murong Yun. Chapter 8. Looking at the bloody scene of Qinghe, Mammy Li quickly took out a handkerchief to cover Gu Wen's eyes. Your Highness, you'd better not look at such filthy things. I'll ask them to clean up these filthy things. Gu Yuan's little face was pale, and she covered her chest like a helpless little beauty who was sick and pitiful. I just wanted to keep her alive, but I didn't expect that in her heart, I was such a person. Sister, we have a good relationship since childhood. As we all know, after your death, I was sick for 7 days. Even the ceremony of crowning the Empress, I asked the Emperor to keep everything simple, because I was afraid that you would be unhappy after seeing it from heaven. But I didn't expect that even if I did that. Your Highness, what kind of master will have what kind of servant? Such a lowly servant is not worthy of you. It's good that she died, so that she won't ruin your reputation day by day. Mammy Li was distressed and held her thin and delicate body. Gu Yuan got down from the high seat with the help of Mammy Li and walked to the inner hall. Imperial concubine Shun, I'm not feeling well today, so I won't keep you any longer. Hearing this, Shen Yueji calmed down, stroked the tea table with her long sleeves and bowed. Goodbye, Your Highness. A faint fragrance assailed his nostrils. Gu Yuan pursed her pink lips and covered her nose with a handkerchief to disperse the faint fragrance. Speaking of Qinghe, she is really a loyal servant. The new empress is in power, and the servants and concubines in the harem are scrambling to flatter the new empress, praising the new empress and demoting her. Coming out of Xianghe Palace, Shuangshi couldn't help complaining. I didn't know that the first miss of the Gu family was bullied and tortured so much when she was alive. The first young master is right. No one in the Gu family is good, but the first miss of the Gu family is so pitiful. She has been used by the Gu family for so many years. Your Highness, how wrong the former empress was when she died. If it were me, I wouldn't be able to rest in peace. The first miss of the Gu family is Madame Morong's biological daughter. Because she was born 1 year earlier than Gu Yuan, Madame Morong has never liked her, so she is treated worse than an animal in the mansion. Your Highness? Your Highness, what's wrong? What? Shen Yueji came back to her senses. Nyang, this servant is talking to you about the Gu family's eldest Mississippi. Shen Yueji restrained the strange look in her eyes. Now we are in the palace, not the general's mansion. You dare to say anything. Aren't you afraid that the walls have ears? Are you not afraid that it will bring you a fatal disaster? After a while, Shen Yueji turned around. She had already walked a long distance away from the auspicious Harmony Palace. Moreover, the Empress is in the prime of her life. She is dignified and benevolent. Who would believe the words of a maid of the late Empress? Your servant. This person looked gentle and kind on the surface, but his heart might be vicious. Your Highness, these were all taught to me by my mother. Shen Yueji shook her head and said no more. Your Highness. Suddenly, someone tugged at her sleeve. Shen Yueji glanced at her. Why did you stop? It's the regent. After hearing Double Happiness's words, Shen Yueji raised her head to look. Not far away, a man dressed in a loose black robe was walking in their direction. The black brocade robe wrapped around his tall and slender body. His jade-like handsome and peerless facial features were like the proudest work of the heavens. His fair face looked like it was covered with snow, white and flawless. Chapter 9. Imo Wuxiang was the regent of the Feng country. If the Gu family and the Xin family occupied half of the Feng country, then he occupied two forces other than the Feng country. No one knew how much military power he had in his hands. Even Feng Juqing had always been wary of him since he inherited the throne. "Greetings, regent." Seeing the man approaching, Shuangshi hurriedly bowed. Imo Wuxiang's deep and cold eyes fell on her for a moment. Then, he moved away and looked at Shun Yueji's delicate and pale face. His eyes were as cold as ice. When he looked at her, she felt as if her body would freeze because of his cold gaze. Beside her, Shuangshi pulled her sleeve with all her strength and whispered to her, Your Highness, come back to your senses. Look at you. You're staring at the regent again." On the phoenix bed, everyone broke the door and entered. He elegantly put on his clothes and left under everyone's gaze. He didn't explain anything and left her alone to face the rumors and slanders. She was paraded on the streets by Feng Juqing and cruelly drowned. Where did he go? I remember that the road the regent took seems to be the Daoyang Palace of the late empress. Why did the regent come here? The man was tall and straight, and his aura was cold and arrogant. His eyes were sharp, and his sharp eyes suddenly narrowed when he heard that. A pair of dark eyes looked in the direction of the Daoyang Palace. His eyes were empty, and there was a kind of emotion that people couldn't see clearly. "Your Highness, why do you have to touch my sore spot?" Shuangshi kept giving her a look. The matter between the late empress and the regent was a taboo. In the inner palace, even the emperor had ordered to keep this matter under wraps, and no one was allowed to mention it again. Was your highness bewitched today? Unlike in the past, when she would stick to the prince regent as soon as she saw him, her tone and gaze today were full of indifference and questioning because of a stranger. Xin Yueji brushed her hand away and looked at his peerlessly handsome face. She continued, before entering the palace, Ben Gong also heard some rumors about the regent and the former empress. The regent's power is all over the court and has an important position in the court. Even the emperor has to be wary of him. That day, you and the former empress were disheveled and everyone rushed into the hall. But you didn't give any explanation and let an unarmed woman face the cold eyes and sarcasm of everyone. Carrying the infamy of being unchaste and unclean, she was reduced from the position of empress envied by everyone to a prisoner, a shameless slut. Prince Regent, may I ask, how did the former empress offend you? Why did you put in so much effort to harm her? When did I say that I would harm her? The man's voice was as cold as snow. His words were like frost falling from the sky. A bone-piercing chill arose spontaneously, like a sharp sword, meeting the man's sharp red eyes. Xin Yueji was shocked. The bottom of his crimson eyes were bloodshot. His handsome and indifferent face couldn't hide the tiredness and sorrow on his handsome face. Prince Regent, please calm down. My Highness has just entered the palace. When she was in the general's mansion, she was used to playing with the first young master and didn't understand these complicated rules. I hope the regent won't blame her. Feeling the murderous coldness from the man, Shuangshi hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed. Today in the Xianghe Palace, when your highness went to pay respects to the empress, she happened to see the empress punishing the former empress's personal maid, Qinghe. She knew some of the former empress's past, so she was so indignant. What did you say? Chapter 10. Your Highness, don't say another word. Beside her, Shuangshi continuously tugged at her sleeves. Your Highness, what's wrong with you today? You've never spoken to the regent like this before. Can't rest in peace? The man's crimson lips twitched slightly, forming a cold arc. His deep eyes looked in the direction of Daoyang Palace. His lips parted slightly. It's good that she can't rest in peace. This way, she can look at me forever. Imo Wuxiang, is there something wrong with your brain? Hearing this, the man's tall figure suddenly stiffened. His entire person was stunned, and it took a long time for him to regain his senses. Your Highness, calm down. Calm down, Your Highness. Hearing Shen Yueji curse, Shuangshi no longer cared about the rules. He hurriedly crawled up from the ground and hugged her. Your Highness, think twice before you act. Ever since you entered the palace, you haven't cursed for many days. You can't curse. You're facing the regent. She already wanted to cry but had no tears. What did you call me? Shen Yueji pushed Shuangshi away and faced him fearlessly. The late empress was not related to you when she was alive and had never offended you. Why did you frame her like this? Or is it that you came to Diaoyang Palace today because you feel guilty towards her? Did you not explain for her? Prove her innocence? His cold gaze once again landed on her. But this time, it was less cold and more probing. Imo Wushang stared at the exquisite face in front of him. Who are you? These three cold words caused Shen Yueji to instantly swallow the words that were at the tip of her tongue. That's right, her current identity was Shen Yueji, not Gu Yueqin. Shen Yueji was in love with the regent of Feng Country. The citizens of the capital knew this. The late empress had an affair with the regent and was drowned by Feng Jiuqing. As a young lady who was in love with Imo Wushang, in her heart, no one wished for Gu Yueqin's death more than her. But now, in front of Imo Wushang, she actually questioned him so agitatedly and even forced him to speak up for Gu Yueqin. It was no wonder that the way he looked at her had changed so drastically. Thinking of this, she covered her lips and suddenly coughed heavily. Her quick-witted eyes turned elsewhere. Looking at the capital, I, Shen Yueji, am the only one who can chase after the regent for 10 miles without feeling tired. Yes, yes, yes. At the side, Double Happiness also nodded vigorously. This servant can testify. Your ladyship hasn't seen the Prince Regent for many days. Perhaps it's because she suddenly met the Prince Regent today that she's a little excited and incoherent. Excited? Shen Yueji's face instantly darkened. Imo Wushang pursed her lips as he took in her expression. His probing disappeared, and only a thin layer of ice was left in his deep eyes. You're not related to her, so why are you suddenly speaking up for her? Double Happiness. Your Highness, why is this consort speaking up for her? Double Happiness. Huh. I'm asking you. It's just that I suddenly realized that the Prince Regent isn't as outstanding as I thought. You're also a man of indomitable spirit, and you occupy half of Feng Country, but you framed a weak and innocent girl. This makes me somewhat suspicious of the Prince Regent's style. I even suspect if I was blind in the past, to actually fall for a sanctimonious hypocrite like you? The man's gaze was filled with danger, and Shen Yueji grew wary. She watched as the man walked closer to her, and suddenly, his cold hand strangled her neck. Chapter 11. Shuangshi was already scared out of his wits and rushed forward to stop him. Bang, with a heavy thud. She was sent flying. Aren't you the one who wants her dead the most? Shen Yueji, what kind of trick are you playing for me? Shen Yueji used both her hands to pry open his big hands. However, her little strength seemed so insignificant to him. Shen Yueji's little face turned pale. Suddenly, she reached for her hair bun and felt a hairpin. She ruthlessly stabbed the back of his hand. Poochie, blood splattered, and a few drops splashed on her clean little face. The man's grip on her didn't loosen, but tightened instead. Shen Yueji's vision gradually became blurry. The handsome face in front of her made people not dare to look at it too closely. He was a demon from hell, cold-blooded and cruel. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so indifferent to her death in her previous life. She stabbed the hairpin very deeply, but he didn't move at all. Only the coldness in his eyes froze and spread to his handsome face. The air was filled with the thick smell of blood and the excessive silence. She could even hear the sound of blood dripping on the ground. Shen Yueji gritted her teeth and forcefully pulled the hairpin out of the back of his hand. She turned around and stabbed the back of his hand 5 or 6 times. The man's stiff body finally trembled. The next moment, she fell to the ground. Holding her neck that was being strangled, Shen Yueji gritted her teeth and glared at the handsome man in front of her. She gripped the hairpin tightly and was about to stab him again. Your Highness. Not daring to look at Imo Wushang's big white hand that was full of frightening bloody holes, Shuangshi hugged her from behind. His voice was filled with a deep sob. Your Highness, hurry and run. Fresh blood dripped down from the back of his hand. Shin Yueji looked at the man's gloomy and complicated expression. Not to mention that the regent killed the late empress. It has only been a few days, and you want to kill me with your own hands? In this world, no one but her dares to treat me like this. Imo Wushang looked at her, a strange layer of sadness appearing in the depths of his pair of deep eyes. The man lightly turned around and looked in the direction of Diaoyang Palace. Your Highness, why aren't you leaving? Shin Yueji stared at him. Imo Wushang, this bastard, was a pervert. Soft tactics didn't work, but he still wanted her to use hard tactics. Glancing at his big bloody hand, she regretted not stabbing a few more holes with the hairpin. Chapter 12. Late at night, Prince Regent's mansion, the cool evening breeze brushed the face, and the thin moonlight shrouded the prince's mansion, bringing with it a cold and gloomy atmosphere. The servants in the mansion all held their breath and did not dare to make a sound. Even the slight breeze was like an invisible sharp blade, scraping against one's face, bringing with it a piercing pain. Since the incident with the late emperor, the Prince Regent's mood was not very good. Even the entire Prince Regent's mansion, which was lifeless before, had now become lifeless, making people fall into hell. Master, I've already investigated what you asked me to do. Jichu pushed the door and came in. He looked at the man standing in front of the window, dressed in a black robe that still couldn't hide his murderous aura. Half of his side face was handsome and as white as snow. His cold eyes looked out of the window, not knowing what he was thinking. Jichu paused for a while and said, "The new imperial concubine Shun, who entered the palace, is indeed the daughter of General Shan He. As for why she suddenly entered the palace, when I inquired about it, I heard that." Speaking of this, he paused again. "I heard that on the day the late empress was drowned in the lake, the eldest miss of the Shen family ran to join in the fun, but was accidentally pushed into the lake. After waking up, Shin Yueji didn't know what was wrong with her and clamored to enter the palace. The Shin family couldn't do anything to her and had no choice but to send her to the palace." He felt that the aura around Imo Wushang was a little colder. Ji Chu pursed his slightly trembling lips. "Master, Miss Gu is no longer here. You have my condolences." Bang! An invisible palm force hit him, and Ji Chu's whole body suddenly flew out like a kite with a broken string. His tall body slammed heavily on the ground. At that moment, his internal organs seemed to have been dislocated by Imo Wushang. He clutched his chest, and the taste of blood filled his mouth. He forcefully swallowed the blood that had reached his throat. Since Miss Gu's death, Master has been up all night, drinking for many days, and has not eaten a meal. I hope Master can take care of yourself and don't let subordinates worry." The big hand under the robe was placed in front of the window. The Prince Regent's mansion was not far from the palace. After Gu Yueqin's death, he habitually stood in front of the window, looking in the direction of the palace. If it was that day, he wouldn't have been so angry. He would never see her on the phoenix bed when she woke up, angry and helpless. He would never see her afraid, worried, and jealous of him. She didn't show how much she cared about that man and how much she was afraid of being discovered by him. She only had eyes for him. From the beginning to the end, he was the only man she liked. How he wished that she could look at him, even if it was just a glance. She told him to get lost, saying that she hated him, and never wanted to see him again. The veins on the back of Imo Wushang's white hands gradually appeared. His handsome face was covered in frost, and an icy aura spread throughout the room. His deep eyes were rapidly covered in layers of ice. "Master," Ji Chu looked at him worriedly, "anyone who hurts her, humiliates her, or betrays her, I will not let them off. Gu Yueqin, even if you treat me like this, I will look for you after I avenge you. Even if you still hate me, this time, I will not let you go. If you hate me, then hate me. I hope you can hate me forever, so that I will always be in your heart." Chapter 13. After waking up, Shin Yueji shouted that she wanted to go to the palace. The Shin family couldn't stop her, so they had to send her to the palace. He felt that Imo Wushang's aura was getting colder. Ji Chu pursed his trembling lips. Master, Miss Gu is no longer here. You, bang. An invisible palm force attacked him, and his whole body was like a kite with a broken string, flying out. His tall body slammed heavily onto the ground. At that moment, his internal organs seemed to have been dislocated by a wushang. Ji Chu clutched his chest. The taste of blood filled his mouth as he forcefully swallowed the blood that had reached his throat. Since Miss Gu's death, Master hasn't slept at all. He drank for many days and didn't eat. We are worried about Master. If this goes on, Master's body won't be able to bear it. The big hand under the robe was placed in front of the window. Prince Regent's mansion was not far from the palace. After Gu Yueqin's death, he habitually stood in front of the window, looking in the direction of the palace. If it was that day, he wouldn't have been so angry. He wouldn't have seen her on the phoenix bed. After she woke up, she was helpless, afraid, and jealous of him. She didn't show that she cared about that man so much, afraid of being discovered by that man. She only had eyes for him. From the beginning to the end, the man she liked was also only him. How he wished that she could look at him, even if it was just a glance. She told him to get out, saying that she hated him, and didn't want to see him for the rest of her life. Blue veins gradually appeared on the back of Imo Wushang's white hands. His handsome face was covered with frost, and the cold aura spread throughout the room. His deep eyes were quickly covered with layers of ice. Master, did you find her body? Ji Chu knelt on the ground with difficulty, swallowing the blood in his throat again. When Master came back, Miss Gu had been submerged in the lake for more than 3 days. I'm afraid her body had been eaten by the fish in the water. He felt the change of the man's aura. In the blink of an eye, Ji Chu's entire body was plunged into the thousands of ice pools, freezing him from the outside to the inside. His heart froze at that moment. He coughed heavily, not daring to look at the man's handsome face. Then we'll drain the South Lake. Flay all the fish and livestock in the lake. Ji Chu was startled. Master, you can't. South Lake is a place for the royal family to go sightseeing. If the lake is drained, I'm afraid it will infuriate His Majesty and the ministers. Who has the right to question my actions? Master, Gu Yueqin. The night was as cold as water. When the man's cold and arrogant voice called out the woman's name, it would involuntarily become softer and more affectionate. Anyone who hurts her, humiliates her, or betrays her, I will not let them off. The hand in front of the window slowly tightened as it looked in the direction of the palace. His black eyes were burning. Even if you treat me like this, even if I avenge you, even if you still hate me, even if you are angry with me, this time, I will not let you go. If you hate me, then hate me. I hope that you can hate me forever. This way, I will always be in your heart. Chapter 14. Imo Wushang, why don't you explain? Tell His Majesty. Tell His Majesty that there's nothing between us. Nothing happened between us. We were all framed. Imo Wushang, you can't go. Come back. Come back. Phoenix Palashin Yueji woke up from the nightmare and opened her eyes. She was soaked in sweat. She wiped the sweat off her forehead. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead. Your Highness, you're awake. Shin Yueji stared at the magnified face in front of her. Seeing that she was dressed differently from when she left, she couldn't help but frown. How long have I slept? Your Highness, you've slept for a day. Since you stabbed the Prince Regent yesterday, you've only woken up now. Your Highness, I thought you could sleep for another day. That way, you'll be safe. When His Majesty comes, I'll reject him on your behalf. His Majesty is here? Yes, Your Highness. Shuangshi looked indignant. But Your Highness, don't be too happy. According to the reliable spy the general planted in the harem, the Empress's face was suddenly covered in rashes. All the doctors in the Imperial Hospital were helpless. His Majesty was furious and questioned what the servants of Xianghe Palace had fed the Empress, and who the Empress had seen. And then, Shuangshi opened her mouth dully. Your Highness, you've been sold out. His Majesty is on his way to Phoenix Palace. The spy asked you to think of a way to deal with it. The general has also started to enter the palace. The spy said that if Your Highness can't think of a way to deal with it, You should pretend to be unconscious and wake up when the general arrives. This Guyuane is too much. Your Highness has just entered the palace. You haven't done anything yet, and that woman is already thinking of ways to frame you. She's really one thing on the surface and another. Qinghe was right. This woman is vicious. She even has a rash on her face. Everyone knows that was a self-directed show. Shuangxi, Your Highness, don't be afraid. With the general and young master here, that woman can't frame you. I was the one who caused the rashes on her face. At worst, we'll just tear them apart in public. Your Highness, what did you say? There's nothing else. Help me freshen up. No, Your Highness. Shuangxi looked at her in confusion, but he still quickly found clothes for her to wear. When he combed her hair, Shuangxi still had a blank expression on his face. Nyang, did you really do it? Why didn't this servant know? Xin Yueji inserted a delicate hairpin into her hair bun. You have to be calm when doing these things. The emperor only has the empress in his heart. These concubines in the inner palace have countless tricks up their sleeves. They only know who is favored and are jealous. They flatter on the surface but do things behind the back. They don't know what it means to advance by retreating. So, Your Highness, you settled for the next best thing and abandoned His Majesty? To please the Empress? What women love the most is their appearance. I've ruined the Empress' beauty like this. Is this considered flattering her? The Empress is the Emperor's favorite person. If anything happens to the Empress, the one who will be distressed is the Emperor. This servant understands. The poison that Your Highness gave the Empress can only be cured by yourself, right? Shuangxi's face lit up. In this way, even if the Emperor comes to punish you, Your Highness can say that you don't know anything. It just so happens that when you were in the general's mansion, Your Highness and young master Xiaotiji did a lot of heartless things. Poison and good medicine are also. Bah, Your Highness and young master Xiaotiji robbed the rich to help the poor. What heartless? The Emperor has arrived. Xin Yueji glanced at her. The imperial palace is not like the general's mansion. If you speak carelessly again, be careful of your tongue. Shuangxi was so scared that she quickly covered her mouth. Your Highness, this servant was careless and spoke too fast. Your Highness, Your Highness. With Shuangxi's help, Xin Yueji stood up from the round chair. From the corner of her eye, she saw a bright yellow robe enter the hall. He bowed and saluted calmly. The man was wearing a golden dragon robe. His hair was as black as ink. His white facial features were clean and handsome. His brows were not like before, gentle like the spring breeze. He always had the demeanor of a gentleman. After becoming the emperor, he had a bit of dignity. Chapter 15. Although Xin Yueji hated him in her heart, she couldn't deny that his face was more attractive than when he was a prince. He was no longer the third prince who plotted strategies, won over the ministers, and was bullied by the princes. Right now, he was above everyone, the leader of the dragons and the ruler of the entire Feng nation who ruled over life and death. Don't stand on ceremony. Feng Juqing looked down and held her hand. He smiled gently. The palace is not like the general's mansion. There are many rules in the harem. If you don't like it, you can tell me. The man's hand was warm and beautiful, white as bone. Especially when he smiled. Even the cold winter would gradually warm up because of him. He had this kind of magic power. Xin Yueji calmly took back her hand. Qinxia feels that the palace is very good. After entering the palace for so long, the servants in the inner palace have not treated Qinxia badly and are respectful to Qinxia. Yesterday, I went to pay my respects to Empress Jiejia. Empress Jiejia was also kind and said a few words to Qinxia. Did Imperial Concubine go to Xianghe Palace yesterday? The one who spoke was Gao Dazhong, who was beside Feng Juqing. He was also the favorite of the late emperor. He had played a part in Feng Juqing's ascension to the throne so smoothly. Xin Yueji moved her eyes away from Feng Juqing and looked at him. Yes, Eunuch Gao, what's wrong? I have been in the palace for more than half a month, but I haven't paid my respects to Sister Empress. If I delay it any longer, I'm afraid that the people in the harem will gossip about me and think that I am relying on the power of my maiden family to act arrogantly in the palace. Speaking of this, Xin Yueji looked at Feng Juqing. Your Majesty, did I do something wrong? Her Majesty's face is covered with rashes. Your Majesty. Gao Dazhong. Yes, Your Majesty. Gao Dazhong quickly shut his mouth when Feng Juqing stopped him. Feng Juqing walked past her and sat down at the tea table. Xin Yueji saw this and quickly poured tea for him. Your Majesty, Eunuch Gao said that Sister Empress's face is covered with rashes. What's going on? Feng Juqing's line of sight stopped at the pair of fair hands that she had placed on the tea set, and his gaze paused slightly. Emperor? Xin Yueji handed him the tea she had poured. Seeing him staring at her hands, she couldn't help but call out to him. Feng Juqing came back to his senses and looked at her exquisite little face. He took the tea from her and took a sip. Who is Imperial Consort's master? With this little bit of skill, how would I dare to show off in front of an expert, much less learn from him? These are all given to me by Big Brother. Don't worry, Your Majesty. After entering the palace, this concubine has always listened to Mother's teachings and has been well behaved in the palace. I definitely won't dare to act recklessly and cause trouble everywhere. Hearing this, Feng Juqing couldn't help but smile. You're quite clever. Putting down the teacup in his hand, Feng Juqing elegantly brushed his dragon robe. When your father told me that he wanted to send you to the palace, I was a little surprised. What are you surprised about? We have heard some rumors about the imperial concubine in the capital. Chapter 16. She blinked her playful eyes. That's just a rumor spread by the people in the capital. Besides, how can the man I like be a hypocrite with no responsibility and a dark heart? No responsibility? Feng Juqing raised his eyebrows slightly as if he was surprised by her evaluation of Mo Wushang. Yes, the regent is a hypocrite with no responsibility and a dark heart. How can he be compared to Your Majesty, who is wise and devoted to the Empress? Speaking of this, Shun Yueji's little face became serious. Your Majesty, don't worry. Although you are devoted to the Empress, but I am also a person with integrity. If Your Majesty doesn't like me, I will not act recklessly, nor will I use those dirty tricks to attract Your Majesty's attention. The people of my Shin family always say what they want to say and never do those fake things. Yes. Feng Juqing chuckled involuntarily and stood up. Zhan is well aware of General Shin's loyalty to Zhen. His daughter, I think, will not be any worse. Your Majesty, about the rash on Empress Sister's face, have you invited an imperial physician? Has the disease been diagnosed? Has the medicine been prescribed? Hearing this, Feng Juqing put one hand behind his back, and his clear eyes were stained with a trace of seriousness. Not yet. How about, Your Majesty take me to see Empress Sister? When I went out to play with eldest brother, because I saw a rotten corpse lying on the road, I was frightened and my face was covered with rashes. Father and mother were so worried that I almost asked all the doctors in the capital for help. In the end, it was a Taoist priest in the pugilistic world who told me some folk remedies to cure it. Frightened? Your Majesty, you don't know. Xin Yueji smiled slightly. This woman's body has always been delicate and noble, and her face is covered with rashes. Most doctors will misdiagnose it as pollen allergy, but there is another kind, which is caused by shock. It causes her face to be red and extremely itchy. If you use the wrong medicine and scratch your face, it will only cause more and more rashes, and it will not go away for a long time. Seeing that the man did not speak, Shun Yueji tentatively said, When I went to visit Empress Sister yesterday, I happened to meet the personal maid of the late Empress, Qing He. Sure enough, when hearing her mention the late Empress, Feng Juqing's handsome and gentle face suddenly sank. Shun Yueji hurriedly knelt on the ground. Your Majesty, please calm down. I know I shouldn't mention the late Empress, but Qing He is indeed the maid of the late Empress. Moreover, the rashes on the Empress' face may have something to do with Qing He. That day in Xiang He Palace, Qing He had insulted older sister Empress and protested for the former Empress. In front of older sister Empress, he had hit his head against a stone pillar and said that he wouldn't let the Empress off even if he became a ghost. At that time, Sister Empress's face was as pale as a sheet. I realized something was wrong and wanted to comfort her, but I was chased out by Sister Empress. Seeing Empress's face softened, Shun, and stood in God. Chapter 17. Feng Juqing stared at her for a long time. The little woman was delicate and gentle. This kind of changing mood was very easy to control. Even Feng Juqing couldn't see through it for a while. It was said that the eldest daughter of the Shen family was arrogant, unreasonable, and capricious. She didn't have the demeanor of a lady from a noble family. Thinking of her habitual action and technique when she poured tea for him, Feng Juqing stopped looking at her and reached out to her. Facing the man's hand, she didn't say a word. Shin Yueji hesitated whether to give her hand to him. What are you waiting for? Don't you want to get up? Hearing this, Shin Yueji quickly put her little hand on his palm and got up from the ground. Your Majesty, you have to believe me. Everything I said is true and I didn't lie. And your concubine's medical skills? Although your concubine doesn't have any medical skills, when it comes to treating the rash, your concubine still knows what to do. Your Majesty, the imperial physicians of the Imperial Academy of Medicine were all helpless when it came to the rashes on the Empress's face. There were also a few imperial physicians who, like what Guifei said, misdiagnosed it as a pollen allergy and prescribed a few patches of medicine. However, after the Empress took the medicine, the rashes on her face seemed to become even more serious. Gao Dezhong said carefully on the side, since the imperial concubine said that she also suffered from this disease when she was young, why don't your Majesty take her to have a try? Shin Yueji also nodded with sincerity. As long as I can help your Majesty solve the problem and do a little bit more. Your Majesty, I will do it without hesitation. Change your clothes and go to Xianghe Palace with me. Feng Juqing glanced at her clothes and said, Why? Shin Yueji lowered her head in confusion and glanced at the clothes on her body. Silk and satin, luxurious jade hairpins. As an imperial concubine in the inner palace, she was arrogant and despotic. She showed off her beauty to the fullest, not leaving behind a single bit. But there seemed to be some displeasure in the man's gentle eyes. Shin Yueji said, Oh, and pulled double happiness behind her into the inner hall to change her clothes. Why are you so gloomy? Did I bully you again? Shin Yueji glanced at Shuangxi, who was putting on her clothes, and pushed her away to dress herself. His Majesty only thinks of the Empress. Today, His Majesty came to Phoenix Perch Palace for the Empress. He even asked Nyang who your teacher is. Nyang, this servant is slightly worried. Worried about what? I'm worried about you, Your Highness. The Emperor is so protective of Empress Shangxin. I'm worried that the Emperor will sense something and feel that you will be at a disadvantage. At that time, if you suffer a loss, eldest young master said that as the Empress's favored servant girl, she is usually the first to be targeted by her enemies. Shen Yueji, it turned out that the reason why this lass was so depressed until now was because she was worried about him. Shin Yueji choked and took off her outer clothes. Give me some clothes that fit me. Shuangxi picked up a beautiful red dress and handed it to her. Your Highness, why don't you wear this? Don't you want to compete with the Empress for favor? Now that her face is full of rashes, you should wear something brighter. When the time comes, just standing there will instantly blind her dog eyes. Chapter 18. When she changed her clothes and came out, the man had been waiting for her on the dragon carriage for a while. There was no impatience in his gentle eyes. When he saw her come out, he stretched out his hand to her. Come up. Shin Yueji placed her small hand on his palm and felt the warmth of the man's palm. She found a place to sit and looked at him with a serious expression. Emperor, on this dragon carriage, is Chun Xie the first person to sit with you? She felt the man's palm suddenly tighten before he could withdraw it. Shin Yueji's little face changed color. Your Majesty, I am in pain. Feng Juqing suddenly came to his senses and let go of her hand. He slightly raised his eyebrows and was about to speak. Look at what this subject Xie is saying. The Emperor has just ascended the throne, and the Emperor hasn't even taken a step into the chambers of the imperial concubines. Other than Empress Jiejia, who else has the honor of riding the dragon carriage with the Emperor? Hearing this, the man did not say more and closed his eyes to rest. The golden sunlight shone on his handsome face. The delicate outline was so perfect that there was no flaw. His long and straight eyelashes were evenly distributed, giving people a feeling that there were too many and too few. In this world, There were few men whose eyelashes could be so perfect. Your Majesty, I am not as considerate as Sister Empress. I know what to say and what not to say. Just now, did I say something that made you unhappy? Shin Yueji turned her face to the side and stared at the man who was resting with his eyes closed with a pair of lively eyes. Maybe her eyes were too focused. Feng Jiuqing, who had always been calm and composed, also felt a little uncomfortable. He slowly opened his eyes and saw a beautiful and outstanding little face in front of him. It was not fully opened and looked a little childish. Feng Jiuqing lowered his head and smiled. He pulled her straight and sat beside him. Don't think too much. I know your character. I won't argue with you. Then, Your Majesty, may this concubine be so bold as to ask, was this concubine the first person to sit with you in this imperial carriage? The emperor's tone was slightly raised. Why do you insist on this question? Because the first time is always unforgettable, whether it's the first meeting, the first wedding night, or the pledge of eternal love. Perhaps men like you, Your Majesty, don't know these things, but for us women, you don't know how important these things are. They are worth thinking about for a lifetime, and every time we think about them, it is a happy thing. Really? The man's elegant voice had a hint of coolness in it. Of course. For example, Your Majesty and the Empress. This concubine still remembers yesterday. When this concubine mentioned Your Majesty in front of the Empress, the expression on Big Sister Empress's face was so shy. I heard that if it wasn't for the late Empress, the Empress might have been Your Majesty's wife a long time ago. It was Your Majesty and the Empress who, Your Majesty, Imperial Concubine, we've arrived at Xianghe Palace. Gao Dezhong's reminder sounded from the side. Shin Yueji glanced at the man's handsome face. His pitch-black eyes were mixed with a strange look. Gao Dezhong. Ah, Your Majesty, your servant is here. Help Imperial Concubine down. The man said these 5 words calmly, then turned and stepped into Xianghe Palace. Imperial Concubine, don't mention the late Empress's matter in His Majesty's ear. His Majesty didn't argue with you, because you just entered the palace. His Majesty knows your character. Don't say such words again in the future, or His Majesty will be angry. Gao Dezhong helped Shun Yueji down from the dragon carriage and didn't forget to earnestly remind her. What's wrong with that? What I said is the truth. If Your Majesty doesn't like it, I will belittle the late Empress in front of Your Majesty and praise her more. Chapter 19. Your Majesty, Inner is weak. You don't have to get up to greet me. In the inner hall, as soon as Shun Yueji came in, she heard the man's gentle greetings and the woman's soft and helpless whispers. Gu Yuan's face was covered with a veil, so her face couldn't be seen clearly. Through the thin veil, people could still vaguely see the bright red rash underneath. As for the man, he carefully helped her lean against the phoenix bed. His handsome eyes were full of love, without the slightest hint of disdain. Gu Yuan was a little surprised by her appearance. In particular, her red clothes were bright and beautiful, and her face was exquisite. Just by standing there, she could involuntarily attract the attention of others, let alone the current her. Her face was red and swollen, and she looked extremely ugly. She was a little depressed, but she forced a smile and said, Sister Imperial Concubine is here. I'm sorry you made fun of my appearance. If Your Majesty didn't suddenly go to Fengqi Palace, I wouldn't know you were sick. I heard that the imperial physicians in the imperial hospital were helpless. Fortunately, when I was young, I also had this kind of illness when I went out with my brother. I specially asked Your Majesty to bring me here to see you. Imperial Concubine, can you cure the rash on my face? Don't worry, all the children of the Shin family have some medical skills. Feng Jiuqing touched the hair on her temples and said, It's just a face. That's not what I want. Your Majesty, the pretty face under the veil turned red and the rash was covered with a layer of red. From Shun Yueji's point of view, it was very scary. She subconsciously took a step back and averted her gaze. The man and woman whispered in love, gentle and lingering, and the deep love between their eyes seemed to be able to melt each other. If it was before, she would have hated them, but now, she only had indifference. She hated them for their heart-wrenching betrayal. She no longer hated the lingering anger of watching the man she loved hugging her sister and telling each other how much they missed each other. Feng Juqing got up from the bed and moved to the tea table on the side. Imperial concubine. Check the rash on Empress's face. Yes, Your Majesty. Shun Yueji bowed respectfully. When she walked in front of Gu Yuan, she saw that she was still hesitating. She smiled considerately, put down the curtain for her, and waved away the servants in the hall. Big Sister Empress, only this concubine can see your face now. Take off your veil and let this concubine have a look. That way, I can find the right medicine. Gu Yuan didn't suspect anything and took off her veil. If that's the case, I'll have to trouble you, sister. Shun Yueji pinched her chin with her fingertips and looked around. There was a hint of seriousness in her beautiful eyes. Gu Yuan noticed that something was wrong with her expression, so she asked carefully, Imperial concubine, is there a way to treat the rash on my face? Shin Yueji withdrew her hand and stared at her for a while. According to the rash on your face, it's similar to the rash I had when I was young, but the color is darker. Back then, I saw a rotting corpse lying on the road and was frightened, causing my face to be covered in rashes. The rashes on Big Sister's face are very dark. It seems that you have suffered a lot of fright. That's true. She smiled considerately. Yesterday, there was a lot of blood in Qinghe. There was a big bloody hole in your head because of the stone pillar. Everything was scattered on the ground. It must have been hard for Big Sister Empress to be so scared. Chapter 20. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw her gaze pass through the thin curtain and look at the young emperor sitting on the round chair not far away. Her tearful eyes made people involuntarily feel pity for her. Ah, she let out a soft murmur. She quickly attracted the emperor's attention. Shin Yueji spread out a thin layer of red skin from her face on her palm. Sister's skin is really delicate. These red rashes have ruined the delicate skin on elder sister's face. This concubine will peel off these old red rashes and then apply some medicine on elder sister's face. I guarantee that within 3 days, elder sister's face will be whiter and smoother than before. Gu Yuan originally wanted to get angry because of the pain, but she suddenly heard these words. Especially the man outside the curtain, after listening to Shan Yueji's explanation, he slowly withdrew his steps and sat back. Gu Yuan endured the pain on her face. The red rashes on her face looked very scary. Only her eyes were sad and moving, like the morning dew with water, clear and transparent. How does Sister Gu Fei know these medical skills? As she spoke, Shin Yueji tore off a piece of red rash from her face. Seeing Gu Yuan's thin body trembled in pain, she couldn't find an excuse to get angry for no reason, which made her face redder and redder. Ordinary doctors don't know these, and I learned it from a Taoist. At that time, the doctors in the capital couldn't do anything about the red rashes on my face. They also prescribed some medicine for allergies, but the more they took, the more serious it became. Coincidentally, the Taoist appeared. He first peeled off the red rashes on my face, and then applied some of his Yulu ointment. Within 3 days, new skin grew, and it was even more delicate than before. When she peeled off the third piece of skin, Gu Yuan was already a little scared. She couldn't help but circle her palm under the brocade quilt. She avoided her hand and revealed a smile. Gu Fei was brought here by the emperor, and I trust you. Today, Gu Fei helped me, and I will remember your kindness. What are you saying, elder sister? You and I are both His Majesty's imperial concubines. We should support each other. It's my first time in the palace, so I don't know the rules. Since elder sister is taking such good care of me, when elder sister is sick, younger sister should be more concerned about you. Seeing her hand reaching for her face again, Gu Yuan moved away with a lingering fear and covered her face with her hands. My face is covered with rashes and looks ugly. Let Mammy Li do the rest for the imperial concubine. You don't have to do it yourself. All right. Shin Yueji smiled considerately and said, I know that you have not suffered much and your body is delicate. Anyway, the skin of the rash is on your face. It is really painful to tear it off. However, you must tell Mammy Li not to tear it lightly. Otherwise, if the rash can't be torn off, the medicine will be in vain. I'm afraid that it will get worse instead of lighter. As she spoke, Shin Yueji took out a white porcelain bottle from her long sleeve. Chapter 21. Holding the Yulu ointment, Gu Yuan put it aside. Thank you, imperial concubine. After that, her soft eyes looked at the man sitting next to the tea table. Your Majesty, I'm not feeling well these days. I'm afraid I can't keep you. Hearing this, Feng Juqing came forward and tucked her in the quilt. He said gently, It's okay. You should take care of yourself first. I'll see you later. Since Imperial Sister is fine, there's nothing for me to do here. Your Majesty, Imperial Sister, I'll go back first. Shin Yueji raised her hand and tidied up her messy hair as she said softly, When the rash on my face is gone, I'll personally entertain Imperial Concubine Shun. Come. What's wrong with your hand? Gu Yuan was interrupted by the man halfway through her words. Listening to Feng Juqing's words, Gu Yuan looked at her hand subconsciously. Shin Yueji seemed to react. She quickly fixed her hair and put her red and swollen hand behind her back. Nothing. Feng Juqing frowned and stepped forward. Give me your hand. Shin Yueji hesitated. Your Majesty, don't look at it. I'll wash it with water when I go back. It's too ugly. I'm afraid it will dirty your eyes. The man didn't say anything and directly pulled out the hand she had hidden behind her back. When he rolled up her long sleeve, he saw that her fair hand was red and swollen. The red marks on it were exactly the same as the rash on Gu Yuan's face. Gu Yuan was surprised. Imperial concubine Shun. What happened? Looking at the man's gentle and caring eyes, Shin Yueji took her hand out of the man's palm and silently put it behind her back again. The rash has some toxins. My skin has always been delicate and not as good as a man's. When I pulled the rash for my sister, some of the toxins soaked my hand, so it's red and swollen. But I have Yulu ointment. When I go back, I'll wash my hands with water and apply some Yulu ointment. It will soon go away. Seeing that the man didn't speak, a pair of unreadable eyes fell on her and didn't move away. Even if Gu Yuan said something, he didn't seem to hear it. On the phoenix bed, Gu Yuan bit her red lips so hard that they almost bled. She forced a weak smile. Don't mind Imperial Concubine Shun. In the past, Bin Gong also had a pollen allergy and my body was covered in rashes. At that time, elder sister was still alive. She took care of Bin Gong day and night. When she woke up, her hands were also covered in frightening red rashes like Imperial Concubine Shun. When His Majesty saw it at that time, his heart ached terribly. After being together for so many years, Shin Yueji naturally knew that Gu Yuan's unnecessary explanation was to tell her that Feng Juqing wasn't interested in her, but that he was thinking of her dead sister. He advised her to put away some thoughts that she shouldn't have. She laughed lightly. I didn't think that the previous empress would go so far. The emperor still has some feelings for the previous empress. Emperor, this concubine will take her leave first. Big sister empress is currently ill and needs someone to accompany her. This concubine will not disturb emperor and big sister. Gao Dazhong, your servant is here. Let's set off to Phoenix Perch Palace. Gao Dazhong looked up at the emperor's indecipherable expression and accepted the order shakily. Yes, your Majesty. Gu Yuan's face darkened. Chapter 22. Looking at the man's handsome and gentle face, Gu Yuan bit her red lips under the veil and weakly smiled. Because Guifei Mimi treated the rash on this concubine's face, it caused her delicate hands to become like this. Your Majesty, you must properly thank Guifei Shun on behalf of this concubine. In this way, I won't feel so guilty in my heart. Okay. Feng Juqing said a few more words to her considerately and patiently. Then he turned around and left with Shan Yueji. When their figures slowly disappeared from her sight, Gu Yuan looked at the Yulu ointment on the phoenix bed and couldn't help but clench her hands. After Mammy Li came in, she saw Gu Yuan staring at the white porcelain bottle on the bed with fierce eyes. Your Highness, what's wrong with you? I'm fine. Gu Yuan restrained the fierce light in her eyes. Mammy Li, tear off the red rash on my face. Hearing this, Mammy Li responded and carefully touched her face. Thinking of the words Shin Yueji said before she left, Gu Yuan bit her lower lip. You're so gentle. Don't you want me to get better quickly? Your Highness, Mammy Lee didn't understand why she suddenly got so angry. She knelt on the ground in fear. Your Highness, it's just a red rash. It will disappear in a few days. According to the Emperor's feelings for you, you don't have to worry. Tell me, who is the culprit behind the rash on this Empress's face? Your Highness, are you suspecting concubine Shan? Shouldn't I suspect her? Gu Yuan sneered. She came to Shanghe Palace yesterday. I've been fine in the palace for several months. Why did I have a red rash on my face when she came? Was it because she was frightened? Why is it so coincidental that I have a red rash on my face and only she can cure it? She was disdainful in her heart. On the day when Qinghe died, she knew best whether she was frightened or not. Moreover, I know the details of Shun Yueji. She has always admired the regent. She has admired the regent for many years. How could she change her mind so quickly? Mammy Lee, don't you think she is very suspicious? Nyang Nyang's words are reasonable. It is not difficult to suspect that it was the Shun family that deliberately sent Shun Yueji to the palace. The purpose was to go against Nyang Nyang. First, you drugged Bin Gong, then you volunteered to His Majesty, saying that you could cure the rash on Bin Gong's face. Then she said that Bin Gong was frightened and that when she was treating the rash on Bin Gong's face, her hands were stained with poison. Like this, it would be difficult for your Majesty to not care about her. His Majesty has always trusted Nyang Nyang the most. Nyang Nyang, do you want to tell His Majesty about this? I believe that with His Majesty's love for her ladyship, he will definitely. Gu Yuan tightened the porcelain bottle in her hand. Last time, it was because of my elder sister's matter that Bin Gong finally got the Emperor to accept me again. If I go and tell him about Shin Yueji again, he will definitely not be happy. Then, who said that the eldest daughter of the Shin family is brainless and stupid? She only knows how to make trouble. I heard that the eldest daughter of the Shun family was pushed into the water the day before she entered the palace. After waking up, she asked General Shun to send her to the palace. At that time, the eldest son of the Shin family tried his best to stop her, but he failed. Really? Gu Yuan narrowed her eyes. Where is Yueshio? Nyang Nyang, I'm here. Chapter 23. Pick some of our best jewelry and send it to Shan Guifei. Just say that Shan Guifei treated our illness. Whether the rash is gone or not, we owe her a favor. These things can be regarded as a thank you gift to her. Yes, Nyang Nyang. Pay more attention to His Majesty. If His Majesty continues to stay in Phoenix Perch Palace and doesn't leave, then introduce all the rewards that her ladyship has given to noble consort Shan one by one until His Majesty leaves. Do you understand? Thank you, Mammy Lee, for reminding me. I understand. I will never let the eldest daughter of the Shin family and the Emperor have a chance to be alone. The Emperor can only belong to Nyang Nyang. Yushio took the order and left. Mammy Lee patiently helped her tear the dry rash on her face and said flatteringly, Nyang Nyang, don't worry. Even if the eldest daughter of the Shin family has the ability, she can't make any big waves in the palace. In the harem, who doesn't know that Nyang Nyang is the favorite of the Emperor? Even if she is the favorite, she can't fight against the people who play tricks behind the scenes. Even if the Emperor believes in us, he can't listen to the rumors of others. Mammy Lee, have you forgotten what happened to the late Empress? Hearing this, Mammy Lee's face stiffened and she bowed again and again. Nyang Nyang is right, I am stupid. Not only Yushio, you also need to pay more attention to Fengqi Palace in the future. This Shen Yueji is not simple. Nyang Nyang, rest assured, I will pay more attention to Shengefei. Avoiding her hand, Gu Yuan gently stroked her painful face. You may leave. This Empress will handle the rest myself. Yes, I will leave now. Shin Yueji, don't mention that you are the eldest daughter of the Shin family. I can destroy Gu Yuan and I can also destroy you. Holding the porcelain bottle in her hand, Gu Yuan's blushed face was cold and contemptuous. She would never allow any woman to covet her man. Your Majesty, my hand is not in the way. But Sister Empress, if you take me away like this, will she be angry with me? They returned to Fengqi Palace in the dragon carriage. The man reached out to her, but Shan Yueji hesitated. The Empress has always been understanding, so you don't have to worry. Yes, Your Highness. At the side, Gao Dazhong continuously gave her a meaningful look. Nyang Nyang, don't refuse anymore. Great General has done countless meritorious deeds for Feng country. Since Great General has sent Nyang Nyang to the palace, how could the Emperor bear to let Nyang Nyang be alone in the palace without anyone to rely on? Go to the Imperial Hospital and summon Imperial Physician Liu. Let him take a look at the rash on Imperial Consort's hand. Yes, seeing her hesitant and careful look, Feng Juqing didn't force her but stood still and looked at her for a while. Are you afraid of me? Ah. Xin Yueji looked at him in confusion. Why does the Emperor say this? It's... She lowered her head in fear. Is this concubine too obvious? The man's clear and moist eyes were as gentle as the spring breeze in March. He raised his lips and chuckled. Do you remember, 3 years ago, when I wasn't the Emperor, I stayed in your general's mansion for a few days? Xin Yueji shook her head. This concubine has forgotten some things since the sunset and didn't know that your majesty had gone to the General Fu. While she was speaking, the man grabbed her wrist and carried her down from the car. Xin Yueji was shocked and instinctively wrapped her arms around the man's neck. She subconsciously buried her head in his arms. It was a familiar movement and a panicked and frightened expression. It was not the same face, but even the slight frown was so similar. Chapter 24. It was undeniable that everything about her, her tone, her actions, and her demeanor had long taken root in his heart and penetrated deep into his bones. She felt the strength of the man's grip on her waist gradually tightening. That strength seemed to be able to crush her bones. Xin Yueji kept struggling in his arms. Your Majesty, you're hurting me again. She struggled out of Feng Juqing's arms and jumped down, looking at the man's handsome face absent-mindedly. She bit her lips aggrievedly. Your Majesty, what are you thinking about? I called you a few times, but you didn't answer me. It's my negligence. Feng Juqing looked at her and smiled guiltily. Maybe there are too many things in the court, so I'm a little tired. Did I hurt you just now? Xin Yueji rubbed her waist that was still in pain. It hurts. If your Majesty used your strength on my neck, I almost thought that your Majesty was going to strangle me to death. Knowing that women were usually delicate, Feng Juqing held her hand guiltily. Let's enter the hall first. Let me see if there are any bruises. Hearing this, Xin Yueji was shocked. She let the man lead her. When they entered the hall, seeing that the man was really going to take off her clothes, Xin Yueji jumped up. The sudden action stunned not only her, even Feng Juqing was stunned for a moment. Then she saw that his handsome brows were slightly wrinkled, as if he was impatient. Xin Yueji blushed. Your Majesty, are you so gentle to everyone? The man raised his eyebrows and said nothing. If you treat everyone like this, I don't think it's a big deal. But if your Majesty only treats me like this, it will make me misunderstand. Misunderstand what? Xin Yueji turned her back awkwardly. Your Majesty, you have 3 palaces and 6 courtyards and a group of concubines. How can you not know what I'm embarrassed about? Feng Juqing was not a stupid person. Even if he didn't understand the meaning of her words just now, seeing her reaction now, he knew what she was talking about. He laughed. Don't misunderstand. I just want to see if I hurt you just now. In the general's mansion, Mother said that a woman's body can only be seen by her husband. In the heart of the emperor, his wife was the empress. After the emperor ascended the throne for several months, he only thought about the empress. The imperial concubines in the harem were simply decorations to the emperor. I know I can't compare to Sister Empress, but this body... Shen Yueji rubbed her waist, and her voice was a bit heavy. His Majesty doesn't have this chair in his heart. When you look at this chair's body, it's like looking at a man, without any emotions. However, this concubine is thin-skinned and easily lets one's imagination run wild. Before your Majesty sees this concubine as a woman, it's best if you don't look. Is Imperial Concubine rejecting me? The man's eyes drooped, his body tall and slender, his handsome features indiscernible. His eyes were as gentle as a hot spring. Shin Yueji put down the hand that was rubbing her waist. She couldn't help but mutter in a small voice. The emperor said that he knows this concubine's character. He won't argue with this concubine over some small matters. Are you using what I told you before to stop me? The emperor is the emperor. A gentleman cannot go back on his words. The emperor's words are the imperial edict. This concubine is using the emperor's imperial edict to speak, not to stop the emperor. If it was someone else, Feng Juqing might not be angry, but he also wouldn't care about that person. However, this person was Shen Yueji. From the first time he saw her, he knew that she was different from other women. She was too narrow-minded. Moreover, there was an inexplicable sense of familiarity about her, and he wanted to get close to her. Chapter 25. He sat on the round chair and took a sip of tea. He reprimanded her warmly. You have a sharp tongue. When did Jin say that I see you as a man? Come here. Shen Yueji hesitated and looked at the man for a long time. Your Majesty, this concubine's waist hurts. The man still chuckled, and his slender white hand lightly knocked on the table. His elegant and soft, handsome face was like a peaceful, bright moon, like a painting. Guifei, you keep saying that your waist hurts, but you don't let Chen see it. What do you mean? In order to treat Empress Jejia, this concubine hurt her hand, and Emperor held my waist. Today I have suffered two kinds of crimes. Emperor needs to compensate this concubine. It was rare to see a serious look on her face. Feng Juqing listened attentively. Tell me, how do you want to compensate? This concubine misses my brother at home. Shen Yueqi? Feng Juqing continued her words without much surprise on his face. After this concubine entered the palace, eldest brother was sick in bed because he missed this concubine and refused to eat. I thought that he would get better after a while, but father sent a message to the palace, saying that eldest brother was so thin that he was only skin and bones. Father and mother were worried, deeply afraid that in the future, this concubine's Shun family would be destroyed in the hands of eldest brother. As a last resort, they could only ask this concubine for help. Feng Juqing coughed lightly. These days, General Shun was absent-minded in the court, and there were very few memorials, so it was because of your son? Your Majesty. Shen Yueji pitifully knelt in front of him. This concubine knows that men are not allowed to enter the palace without permission. It is not a rule. But your Majesty, for the sake of this concubine's father, let eldest brother enter the palace. Let this concubine persuade him. Since it's about your brother, how can Jin not allow it? Feng Juqing held her hand and wanted to help her up. Your Majesty, this concubine still has a request. The man smiled and patiently held her wrist. Get up and say it. Guifei's waist doesn't hurt anymore. Just now your Majesty promised this concubine to see eldest brother. The pain in my waist immediately recovered. Only my hand is left. Your Majesty, in the future, when you are free, can you come to visit this concubine's Feng Qi palace? Oh. Feng Juqing lowered his head and looked at her. He retracted his hand and placed it behind his back. Your Majesty, this concubine doesn't mean anything else. It's just that when this concubine was in the residence, father, mother, and big brother had always doted on me the most and couldn't bear for me to suffer any grievances. Especially after this concubine entered the palace, they were deeply afraid that this concubine would suffer in the palace. Everyone in the palace knows that your Majesty loves the Empress. Even the people in the capital are no exception. I'm afraid that my father and the others will cry every day because your Majesty doesn't like me in the palace. Don't worry, your Majesty. This concubine doesn't ask for much. Your Majesty only needs to visit this concubine's Phoenix Perch Palace more often during this period of time. This will be considered as giving father and mother enough face. In this way, father and mother won't have to worry about this concubine, and big brother won't be half dead. The man's tone was gentle. That's reasonable. Get up. So you're saying that your Majesty agrees to this concubine's request? Feng Juqing glanced at her. How is it a request if it's within reason? When Shen Yueji heard this, she was overjoyed. She quickly got up from the ground and raised her head to look at him. Then Emperor, since it's not a request, can this concubine make another request to Emperor? Chapter 26. Shen Yueji was dissatisfied, But your majesty's words just now clearly mean to make this concubine reach for a yard after taking an inch. Hiss, what's wrong? Seeing that her little face was about to scrunch up together, Feng Juqing pulled her hand over. The layer of red rash on her hand was gradually expanding, and one could vaguely see that the blood was about to burst out from the thin layer of skin. Come in. Your Majesty, Imperial Physician Liu is here. Gao Dazhong came in from outside in a panic and ordered the middle-aged man carrying a medicine box behind him. Imperial Physician Liu, hurry up and take a look at Imperial Concubine. Liu Yu didn't dare to be slow. After seeing Feng Juqing, he knelt respectfully in front of Shen Yueji. Imperial Concubine, please stretch out your hand. Shen Yueji sat on the chaise longue. After hearing Liu Yu's words, she obediently stretched out her rash-covered hand. She looked towards the man in confusion. Your Majesty only needs to have Imperial Physician Liu prescribe some medicine for this subject. This subject's rash isn't comparable to Empress Jiejia's and is indeed caused by an infection. After this subject's concubine washes her hands and applies the medicine, the rash will disappear. Feng Juqing didn't answer. Shen Yueji twisted her body awkwardly and looked at Imperial Physician Liu, who was taking her pulse. Imperial Physician Liu, the rash on my hand is different from Empress Sister's, right? Liu Yu was terrified and bowed respectfully. Imperial Concubine is right. The rash on your hand is indeed different from Empress Sister's. It is caused by an allergic reaction. I will prescribe some medicine for your Majesty. After soaking in it for a few hours, the rash will disappear. Soaking in it for so long? Feng Juqing finally spoke. His handsome eyebrows slightly frowned. Liu Yu bowed respectfully. Your Majesty's rash is spreading too fast. Most of the poison has spread to the lines on your palm. Much of the poison has also soaked in it. I need to prepare more herbs for your Majesty and mix them in the water. Your Majesty should soak in the water for a few hours so that the poison on your hand can be cleared. In that case, go and prepare it quickly. Yes, Your Majesty, I will take my leave. Your Majesty, I will go with Imperial Physician Liu again. When Imperial Physician Liu is done prescribing the medicine, I will bring it back. Gao Dazhong asked carefully. Feng Juqing looked at him lightly and nodded slightly. Gao Dazhong left with Liu Yugong, and then Shen Yueji heard someone outside the hall reporting that Yu Xiu, the personal maid of the Empress, wanted to see her. She washed her red and swollen hands and glanced at the man beside her. Feng Juqing put down his book. Let her in. Servant Yu Xiu greets your Majesty and Imperial Consort. After Yu Xiu came in, she knelt down respectfully. What are you doing here in Phoenix Perch Palace instead of serving the Empress? Feng Juqing lowered his gaze and looked at her indifferently. Replying to your Majesty, Guifei Nyang infected her hand while treating the Empress. After Guifei Nyang and your Majesty left Xianghe Palace, this servant's Guifei Nyang felt guilty and felt that she had implicated Guifei Nyang. So she had this servant send some jewelry over to express her gratitude. So it's because of Big Sister's kindness. Shen Yueji smiled and immediately ordered Double Happiness to take the jewelry from Yu Xiu. I've long heard that when Jiejia entered the palace, His Majesty rewarded Jiejia with a lot of gold and silver jewelry. I didn't think that Jiejia would be so generous to actually reward these things to this concubine. Chapter 27. Her hands were still holding the things in her hands. This imperial concubine Shun really deserved to be from a vulgar family of generals. She didn't know how to be reserved at all. How could she be so presumptuous in front of His Majesty? Yu Xiu retracted her hands awkwardly. Other than some exquisite and luxurious jewelry, there are also some rare treasures. The Empress was afraid that Your Highness doesn't understand, so she asked me to explain it to Your Highness personally. Isn't this thing bestowed by His Majesty to Elder Sister? Elder Sister needs someone to take care of her right now. Yu Xiu, as her personal maid, you should be more considerate in taking care of her than other palace maids. It just so happens that His Majesty has nothing to do here. Why don't His Majesty introduce these treasures that Elder Sister sent over to me? What kind of rare treasures are they? Shen Yueji took out a pair of red and swollen little hands from the water and waved them in front of Feng Juqing. Her pair of lively eyes also pitifully blinked a few times. Your Majesty, You wouldn't even reject this concubine's small request, right? Imperial concubine, His Majesty has just ascended to the throne. There are a lot of things to deal with in the court. Let this servant handle this kind of small matter. Why are you so insensible? Even if you are a servant of the Empress, you should know your place. How can we servants interrupt when our masters are talking? Shuangxi reprimanded her unhappily. Yu Xiu's expression changed. Ever since her concubine gained power, the servants in the palace, not to mention the palace maids and eunuchs, sometimes even the imperial concubines and masters had to give her some face for the sake of her concubine. This was the first time she was reprimanded for not knowing the rules since she was in the palace for so long. Her face turned pale, but Shuangxi's words were reasonable. In front of His Majesty, she didn't dare to be presumptuous. Miss Shuangxi is right. Please forgive me, this servant. Those who don't know are innocent. This is what His Majesty often says to this consort. Yu Xiu, return to auspicious Harmony Palace to serve elder sister first. Please help this consort reply to elder sister that this consort really likes these things that elder sister sent over. Also, don't let elder sister feel guilty. These are what I should do. Yu Xiu was hesitant. When she looked at Feng Juqing for help, she saw that he had picked up a book again. It was as if he didn't hear Shen Yueji's words. Yu Xiu reluctantly got up from the ground. Your Majesty, Imperial Consort, this servant will take her leave. At this time, Gao Dazhong had just returned from the Imperial Hospital and met Yu Xiu face to face. Yu Xiu's almond-shaped eyes were filled with tears. She glanced at him, stamped her feet, and ran away. Gao Dazhong was dumbfounded. If he was not a eunuch, he would have thought that Yu Xiu was interested in him. He ordered people to bring new warm water and poured all the medicines prescribed by Imperial Dr. Liu into the warm water. After that, he walked towards Shen Yueji and said, Nyang Nyang. Shen Yueji smiled sweetly at him. Thank you, Eunuch Gao. Your Highness, what are you saying? This is what this servant should do. After saying this, Gao Dazhong respectfully returned to the Emperor's side. Your Majesty, just now I heard from the guards in the Imperial Palace that Great General Shun suddenly rushed into the Imperial Palace. That posture made the soldiers guarding the Imperial Gate think that there was a disturbance at the border. No one dared to stop him, and just let Great General Shen enter the Imperial City. Later, I don't know what happened, but before General Shun entered the palace, he returned the way he came. Even his mood was much better. Chapter 28. Is it because father misses me? He wanted to enter the palace to see me, but halfway into the palace, he suddenly realized that the imperial court does not allow men to enter, so he went back? Gao Dazhong nodded. Your Highness, what you said makes sense. General Shun is indeed capable of doing such a thing. Shen Yueji smiled awkwardly. My father, he has always been like this. He is honest. Shuangxi, these jewelry were given by some ministers and foreign envoys. If you like it, there are more in the national treasury. Tell Gao Dazhong what you like, and he will bring it to you personally. Feng Juqing's mind was not on them, but he picked up the precious jewelry that Yu Xiu brought and looked at it carefully. The man's words made Shen Yueji feel flattered. Your Majesty, the jewelry that Sister Empress gave me is already the best in the palace. Feng Juqing glanced at her and raised his voice. Didn't Imperial Concubine say that the first time is the most unforgettable? Yes, it was the second time that Gu Yuan gave her, so it was indeed not precious. Shen Yueji looked at the man's gentle smiling eyes. When she was still Gu Yueqin, he treated her with respect and was gentle and lingering, but he was never so attentive to her. For power, to appease the power behind her. Shen Yueji's heart was filled with endless mockery. Feng Juqing, you really can do anything. You put on a show when you were a prince, and you still put on a show after you became the emperor. She felt disgusted. She hated him, but she pretended to be a young and ignorant girl. She wanted to kill him, but when she looked at him, her eyes were full of affection. How much better could she be? Feng Juqing sat in Feng Qi Palace for a while, and was informed that Lord Li wanted to see him. Before leaving, Feng Juqing gently rubbed her head. Since I miss my brother, I will summon him to the palace tomorrow. Shen Yueji restrained the strange look in her eyes. Your Majesty, why don't you summon him today? It is still early, and the general's mansion is not far from the palace. I am afraid that my brother will not survive today. Behind her, Shuangshi elbowed her. Your Highness, what nonsense are you talking about? Raising her head to look at the man's exquisite face, Shen Yueji revealed a toothy smile. Emperor, it's because this concubine misses my older brother too much. Feng Juqing burst into laughter. Gao Dazhong, your servant is here. Pass my decree. Summon Shan Yueqi to the palace. Yes, I will come to see you after I finish my official business. This concubine respectfully sees off your majesty. Your hand is injured, so let's not do it for now. Soak your hands properly. Shen Yueji playfully stuck out her tongue at him. Qinxie isn't stupid. This is Chen Xie's hand. Of course Qinxie will cherish it. Emperor, quickly leave. Don't let Darrenly wait anxiously. Shen Yueji pulled her wet hands out of the water and pushed the man away. Gao Dazhong squinted at the 2 wet claw marks on his dragon robe and repeatedly wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. Feng Juqing could not help but laugh. He pulled her hand over and examined it carefully. This medicine is indeed effective. Your hand is no longer as red and swollen as before. Double happiness. This servant is here. Take good care of your concubine. Yes, your majesty. Your highness, I suddenly realized that his majesty is quite good. Just now, when your highness made a request to his majesty, this servant was sweating for your highness. Chapter 29. He treats this consort well only because of father's face. If it weren't for father, this consort's fate would be the same as those imperial concubines. After being sent to the palace by their own family, they would ignore me. Occasionally, when they think of me, they would send someone to greet me. But this servant feels that his majesty is not only doing this for the sake of the general. According to this servant's observations, once your highness makes a small move, his majesty will fall into a daze for a long time. Oh, what small move? Shen Yueji took her hands out of the basin, wiped her hands and soaked them again. Shuangshi thought about it seriously. For example, when his majesty came to Phoenix Perch Palace today, your highness poured tea for him. This servant remembers that his majesty suddenly stared at you in a daze. Oh right, your highness. Speaking of this, Shuangshi looked curious. Your highness, when did you learn how to pour tea? You should know that when you were in the general's residence, you and young master drank directly from the teapot. At that time, young master tricked you and put a bug in your tea. You were so scared that you reported it to the general and madam. In the end, young master knelt outside for a day and night on such a cold day and was sick for 3 whole days. From then on, whenever young master caught a bug, he never dared to put it in your highness teapot again. He would put it in his own teapot. Didn't I tell you that the palace is not the same as the manor? How can there be no rules? Find a box for these jewelry and put them away. Glancing at the jewelry that Gu Yuan had ordered people to send over, Double Happiness also had a look of disdain on her face. Isn't she just relying on His Majesty's liking and using His Majesty's bestowment as an excuse to show off to your highness? Now it seems that the youngest daughter of the Gu family is not as loved by His Majesty as the rumors say. If it wasn't because he liked her, Feng Juqing wouldn't have tried so hard to get rid of her and make Guin the empress. Shen Yueji closed her eyes. Big brother will enter the palace today. Go tell the kitchen to prepare more food. Yes, your highness. Shuangshi tested the temperature of the water and looked at her swollen hands with a pained expression. Her ladyship is taking too big of a risk. She even implicated herself. Your ladyship's hands were born so beautiful, but now that they've become like this, I don't know how long it will take for them to recover. Listening to her sigh, Shen Yueji couldn't help smiling. When the rash on the empress's face disappears, my hand will naturally recover. 3 days? Didn't her ladyship say 3 days? After 3 days, the rash on the empress' face should have disappeared, but Imperial Physician Liu had personally seen Yang Yang's hands. Before he left, he also told the emperor that Yang Yang only needed to soak for a few more hours to force the poison out of your hands and your hands would be fine. I said 3 days. Do you think the empress really needs 3 days? The empress is such a smart person. How could she not know what I am thinking? Perhaps it'll be 6 days. Perhaps it'll be 7 days. In short, you just need to remember that she won't come at the time that this consort says. Then, your ladyship, you... Shuangshi was shocked. She had almost forgotten that the daughter of the Gu family was not easy to deal with. The emperor accommodates me so much because of my father. Secondly, it's because this consort cured the person in his heart and injured myself. Thirdly, Chapter 30. Your Highness, what's the third reason? Maybe it's because my behavior is very similar to an old friend of his. Regardless of what he was thinking, Gu Yueqi knew that Feng Juqing wasn't completely emotionless in front of her. Your Highness, you can't go in. This is the Imperial Consort's palace. You, bang. A fluctuation came from outside the hall, interrupting their conversation. Xin Yueji raised her head and looked outside. What's going on? The man was dressed in a purple and gold robe. He was tall and had a handsome and cold face. His pitch-black eyes were as cold as the frozen snow mountains. His eyebrows were sharp and handsome. His peerlessly handsome face was like an immortal from the ninth heaven, aloof and untainted by the mortal world. There was not the slightest trace of humanity on him. Because of his arrival, the temperature of everything in the warm Phoenix Perch Palace gradually melted, leaving only layers and layers of cold air enveloping it, spreading endlessly. Seeing the man, Shun Yueji's hands in the basin couldn't help but tremble. Why was this guy here? Imo Wushang's cold gaze swept across her body and finally landed on her pair of red and swollen hands. His icy eyes were deeply locked as he examined the huge Phoenix Perch Palace. When he only saw the two of them, his dangerous brows couldn't help but furrow even more. Your Highness, my master is here for His Majesty. I heard that His Majesty has been staying in your Phoenix Palace today. I hope your Highness can forgive me if I have offended you. Ji Chu's handsome face was full of smiles. If his master wanted to break in, there was nothing he could do. He couldn't stop her. Taking the towel from Double Happiness, Xin Yueji wiped her hands and stood up. She stopped 3 steps away from the man who was emitting an icy aura. His Majesty has tacitly allowed the regent to go in and out of the harem freely. But His Majesty has never tacitly allowed the regent to break into the imperial consort's palace, right? Imo Wushang's eyes were as sharp as a knife. Why do I need others' tacit consent to where I want to go? Shun Yueji couldn't help choking. Are you being reasonable? This is my bedroom. If you barge in rashly while I'm changing my clothes, wouldn't you be able to see me? I'm His Majesty's woman. Is the regent so free every day? Instead of doing good things, you only know how to humiliate the imperial consort's purity? Your Highness. Shuangshi secretly pulled her and muttered in a low voice. Did you forget what happened yesterday? Today, she saw that the Prince Regent was indeed here to look for the Emperor and did not intend to settle old scores with her ladyship. How good was that? Double Happiness secretly rejoiced in his heart. He didn't expect her ladyship to start finding trouble with the regent again. The regent was such a difficult person to talk to. If they were to settle old and new scores with him, this was the Phoenix Perch Palace. Now that he had come to their nest, where were they supposed to run to? Shun Yueji was somewhat worried by Double Happiness's words. She silently took another step back. For the time being, seeing that one of his fair hands was full of bloody holes, she didn't want to argue with him anymore. His Majesty is not here. Where? Where is it? Hearing these 2 words, Shen Yueji couldn't help but laugh. The Emperor has just ascended the throne and is busy with official business every day. Ben Gong is just one of the thousands of imperial concubines he has. Does he have to report to Ben Gong where he goes? Seeing the man's handsome eyebrows wrinkle deeper, Double Happiness hurriedly jumped out. Imperial study. His Majesty has gone to the Imperial study. I heard that Lord Li asked for an audience. His Majesty has gone to the Imperial study to see Lord Li. Chapter 31. Imo Wushang glanced at her and said coldly, Your servant girl is more sensible than you. Before Shin Yueji could reply, Double Happiness wiped her sweat and said, Thank you for your compliment, Regent. Thank you, thank you. Shen Yueji was speechless. Why did you suddenly enter the palace to look for the emperor? And with so many people? After a long time, Shen Yueji finally found her voice. Imo Wushang, who was about to leave, paused and looked up at her. Ask him to give the order to drain South Lake. For some strange reason, he, who had always been disdainful of answering other people's questions, actually subconsciously picked up her words and answered. Not only Ji Chu, but even he was stunned for a moment. You want to drain South Lake? Shin Yueji was shocked. South Lake was not unfamiliar to her. She could not forget it even if she died. Her previous self was drowned in South Lake. The water filled her internal organs and made it hard for her to breathe. Water splashed into her body, torturing, struggling, and painful. Even now, she could still feel the pain of being forced to drown. She did not care about anything else and walked quickly to Imo Wushang. Why do you suddenly want to drain South Lake? South Lake is a place for the royal family to have fun. In the entire capital, the late emperor personally named it the #1 South Lake in Feng Country. It's a sacred place for the royal family to have fun and recite poems. So what? There's no reason. No matter how powerful you are as the regent in Feng Country, and no matter how much His Majesty fears you, no one will agree to your unreasonable request of draining South Lake's water. Making trouble out of nothing? Imo Wushang's voice was as cold as ice. His eyes were as sharp as glass, giving people a cold and dangerous feeling. Shin Yueji clenched her teeth. Moreover, the late empress was drowned in South Lake. It's been a few months since then. Her corpse must have been soaked in the water and rotted. Her face is extremely ugly. She was humiliated and cursed when she was alive. After her death, does the regent still want to expose her corpse to the public and turn her beautiful face into a bloated, ugly, and disgusting corpse full of maggots? You dare call her disgusting? Not me, it's you. Once the water in South Lake is drained, her body will be exposed to the public. The regent should know better than me how big South Lake is and how much water there is in South Lake. When the time comes, you will make such a big scene. It will definitely attract a lot of people from the capital. Regent, what do you think? She had already died a horrible death when she was alive. Gu Yueqin didn't want her rotting corpse to be exposed in front of everyone and be pointed at. Not to mention the people of the capital. Even she herself felt disgusted. Moreover, it had been more than a month. The fish in the water might have already devoured her rotten body clean. South Lake covered such a vast area, and the water was thousands of feet deep. What was his motive for doing this? Would it be ugly to do her in public? Could he not tolerate her? She is alone. Even if her corpse is rotten and her face is ugly, she is still alone. The world could despise her, but Gu wouldn't. Whoever dares to insult her, I will make sure that they will not be able to live or die. The regent likes the late empress? Imo Wushang didn't deny it, but the cold aura he exuded slowly subsided because of Shan Yueji's words. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.